The one interaction was a police officer who found one of these extraterrestrials, picked the extraterrestrial up and put it in the back of the police car, and unfortunately got scratched by the extraterrestrial, came in contact with it, and subsequently contracted something that killed him. So we got the chance to interview his sister, grab all the files, grab everything, grab all the evidence. They're going to want to see all the evidence. How has it affected her life 30 years later? And she said 2 or 3 times, "Why are you asking me about myself? Why are you asking me about me?" Because she had never been asked about how that whole experience with her brother and everything, how did it affect her and her family?
What if I told you that everything you know is just the beginning? Beyond the veil of the ordinary lies a realm of hidden knowledge, ancient wisdom, and untapped potential. A place where consciousness expands, reality bends, and the impossible becomes possible. You weren't meant to stay asleep. You were meant to awaken. Open your mind, remember who you truly are, and step with me beyond the frequency 369. Hey, before you start the episode, if you're on YouTube or Rumble, like, subscribe, and hit that bell. You want to make a comment? Go for it. It's America. If you catch me on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, hit me with those 5 stars. I appreciate the support. Let's start the show. Welcome to Beyond the Frequency 369. I'm your host, Cesar Pagan, and today on the show, I'm joined by Rob Freeman, aka the UFO World Explorer. Rob's been chasing the unknown since he was 12 years old and has now traveled to over 14 countries and 50 cities with some next level gear, searching for answers out in the field. Now, his name may sound familiar because he was on a recent episode, which I'll put the link above, with Nikki Williams on Mindsight. He founded Vision Without Eyes, teaching people how to see without their physical eyes and even make contact that way. We're about to get into some wild territory with Rob. And also, we have an extra treat. With us is the incredibly talented Mark McNabb, a 35-year veteran in TV production who's worked on some seriously eye-opening documentaries like Making Contact, Be Inspired, and the Encounter series, filming across Latin America, Europe, and beyond. He's got a deep eye for story and knows how to capture the extraordinary. Glad to have him here as well. And with that being said, let me bring in Rob and Mark. Hello, gentlemen. How are you?
Hey, Cesar. Thanks for having us.
Great to meet you.
Fantastic.
Great to meet you.
Same. Absolutely. I make sure I let all my guests know that I'm sitting here in gratitude because you both are gifting me your time to sit here with me and have a conversation, bring in your knowledge, your experiences, and more importantly, allow my audience to hear you, get to know you, and hopefully learn something new. So with that being said, guys, let's go straight into it. I want to ask you both a question. What do you think people get wrong when they hear the phrase making contact? Is it really about aliens or is it something deeper? And Rob, if you can start with that response.
Yeah, well, for me, making contact did start out actually trying to make contact with ET beings. And in fact, we were successful at that. But, these days, when we talk about making contact, it's, there's the whole phenomenon involved. It seems when you start looking for lights up in the sky, you soon find out that it's all the things that are happening around you. And we call it cool high strangeness, Caesar, but you're literally making contact on that level also. So it actually encompasses quite a wide range of things in this phenomenon.
Thanks, Rob. And Mark, what are your thoughts on that?
I would probably, Cesar, add to that the understanding that Rob and I have now been, this is our 10th year, and I'll update your listeners as well, because we're actually at 21 countries. And
wow.
So for us, I think that a lot of what's happened for us is when it comes to making contact, it's like, yes, at the beginning, it was like, can we have a physical contact? Like, can we be face to face with an extraterrestrial, or even have these experiences that could happen in the sky or all around us? And I think I would have to say philosophically, I guess, at some level, making contact also involves the human experience of being in the field with like minded individuals, being with people who have had experiences. It's a bit of a community feeling. So you're making contact with extraterrestrials, but you're also making contact with your fellow human. And you're getting the chance to have that free space. You know, you have that space, that comfort, that trust to be able to talk about your experiences. And I think doing that creates an even higher level of making contact.
Yeah. Well said, Mark. And Mark, I do want to ask you this following up question. You guys have been in so many different countries, so many different cities. Do you believe, or have you seen that there's certain cultures that are more receptive to this phenomenon compared to others? And if so, name a few.
Excellent question, Cesar. Across the 21 countries, I would say instantly South America, we have gotten into the back of taxi cabs and had taxi cab drivers just start talking. And it's matter of factly. You know, it's not like let me tell you, and there's no dramatic music or anything in his voice. It's like it's almost commonplace, you know. Very briefly, I'll say, and this is the one I love to tell, is when we went to Peru the first time. It was in our first year, and we went to a very infamous beach. It's called Playa Yaya, and it's in Chilca. And to go out there, we didn't know what to expect. We didn't know what was going to happen. But in a long story, in a shorter form, we came onto the beach and we saw these gentlemen painting their little houses and huts and different things on the beach. And we were very bold. We walked right up to them. I kind of hung back with my camera a little bit and engaged in a conversation. And have the gentleman, and this always stays with me, to have that gentleman continue to paint, not even breaking contact with what the work was. He starts talking about a craft that came up out of the water. It hovered over the houses. It was over the, and he told that like he would be telling anybody a story sitting on the front porch of his house. So it's just not like all the shock and awe that maybe North America kind of infuses into the phenomenon. It's more it's regular, it's normal. It's just part of their lifestyle.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel that way too. I feel like North America is the place where you hear a lot more folks talking like in the closet about it, you know. Well, not these days anymore, but maybe like, I don't know, a little over 10 years ago or so. But there are some areas where people just kind of like say, hey, don't talk about this too much in public, you know, where you have a guy there just painting like, oh yeah, just flew over there and, you know, one just walked by me, or, you know, things like that. Rob, I want to give you the same opportunity. Do you agree it's also the same place, South America, or are there other places for you?
Yeah, we love South America, and I think it's because of the culture. You know, there's a lot of connections to the indigenous people there in many of the countries, and it's just matter of fact. You will scarcely run into anybody that has not had contact in some way, shape, or form. Like every single person we interviewed, whether off the street, either they themselves had experiences or, you know, one of their family members did. Like it's just everywhere. It's not a big deal. Now, the other place that I love too is Australia. That's where I had the face-to-face with the ET being, was in Australia.
Well, let's talk about that, Rob. Let's go straight into that. That's a great segue. If you don't mind, start telling us about that story, because we talked about it briefly on our last episode, and this is what kind of booked you for this one. So let's do it.
Sure. So we were on a 3-week expedition. There was the three of us from Canada, and then we met with Lauren Kurth from Australia. And she's quite an experiencer. And we had flown to the middle of Australia to Uluru. It's that big rock, Ayers Rock, they call it, or Uluru. It's in the middle of Australia, and it's like a monolith. It just kind of goes straight up, and it's well known landmark. And we were there. Mark and our other member was there. Mark was doing, the background filming and so on that he does. And they had been out during the day just to get B-roll. And, it was pretty hot there and he was pretty bagged out. And that night, I wanted to go sky watching, you know? I mean, we'd flown all the way across Australia to get there. I want to get my equipment going. So I said to Mark, you guys want to come sky watching with us tonight? Oh, we're pretty bagged. We're going to just hang back. So I said to Lauren, hey, why don't we make contact? Why don't we just stay out all night long? Like, who cares? It's warm enough. We can just be on the ground, laying down, looking up if we want. So, Mark and our other member, they were bagged from filming all day, getting B-roll. And it was pretty hot there in Uluru. And I said, well, we're going to go out sky watching tonight. And I asked Lauren, why don't we just stay out all night? See if we can make contact. And I mean, in some ways, I think maybe we will, maybe we won't, but you got to try. And I said that, but we were just going out sky watching really. And we were set up. We drove about a 30-minute drive away from the resort. The resort's in the middle of nowhere, and that literally is the village of this area. There's not much there. And, we drove straight down the road. It's desert. You've got a few little bushes here and there. There's the odd little scrub tree, maybe about 7 or 8 or 10 feet high, and that's about it. And we thought we would like to find somewhere where it was more private because we're, in the middle of the outback. There's not too many vehicles that go through there, but, if anything did that was, nefarious purposes, we didn't want to be seen off the highway. So we were looking for a spot that was hidden. And you can drive anywhere on the desert, not just the highway. It's all hard path. So we saw like a small little grove of small trees and bushes, and we just drove off the road and went behind them. And, this is no different than, 1,000 other places in the desert all the way across. And we were set up that we wouldn't be able to be seen from the highway because we're going to be there all night. We didn't want to have any issues. And about 1 o'clock in the morning, now there'd been only 3 vehicles that were on the highway all night. That was it. 3 vehicles. But about 1 o'clock in the morning, I saw lights coming down the highway, slowing down. And I thought, oh, that's odd. Maybe they've got car trouble or something. The car lights came almost to a stop and then turned towards us. I could see the lights shining right at us. Now, bear in mind, we're kind of behind the bushes, so we're looking, between the bushes and that to see this. And to our unbelief, this car came right to where we were. Like we were about, 150, 200 feet off the highway. And the car came to within 30 feet of us. And the guy parked. And, our hearts are pounding. It's like, what's going on here? Like, the outback is huge across Australia. And what are the chances that somebody would just drive to where we were and they can't see us from the highway? And this is all the same as anywhere else. Like, this is just blowing our minds that this is happening. So I said to Lauren, I'm going to go talk to this person. She said, don't you dare. And I said, why not? She said, well, what if he's got a knife? I said, well, I've got my laser in my back pocket. He'll get it in the eyes if he comes at me with a knife. And she says, well, what if he's got a gun? And I said, well, he can have all my equipment. It's all insured. But I said, I'm going to go talk to him. Like, I didn't feel scared. So I went over and she said, well, I'm going to come also. So we walked over and he got out of the car. Now, prior to him getting out of the car, we had been watching a bit. And so the dome light went on, it went off, it went on, and he seemed to be fidgeting with things on the dash or whatever. But we went over and he got out of the vehicle and we said hello. And we started talking to him. But then from that point on, nothing made sense at all, Cesar. Like the things we were talking about just didn't add up. Like he said that he had just driven something like 18 hours from the coast. And he said he was going home for the weekend. And he had another 18 hours to drive. And I'm thinking, well, who drives 36 hours to go home for the weekend? Like that is just about your whole weekend right there, especially if you've got to go back again. So that didn't make sense. The way he was talking, did not sound normal. Now, I didn't even make a connection at that point that this guy could be an ET. He did look like your classic Nordic. Like, the guy was tall, he was handsome, he was blonde hair, he had blue eyes. So, from that point of view, he was your classic Nordic looking ET person on Earth. Okay. But everything he said, just nothing made sense. Like, we asked him, but why did you pull off the road to come here? I'm just curious. And he said, well, I thought I would just take some time out and go sky watching. I thought, well, that's what we're doing. And as we were talking, it seemed like he was reading my mind or mirroring somehow. As I looked at him, I thought, for somebody that's been on the road for 18 hours, and he said he worked in a mine and he had just come straight from the mine, I thought, well, where's the 5 o'clock shadow or 10 o'clock shadow or 1 o'clock in the morning shadow? Not there. I looked at his clothes and they were like they were just pressed. Like, if you take your clothes to the laundry and you open them up and they're all pressed and clean, they look like they were brand new or pressed and washed and pressed and clean. Like, for somebody that's been in a car for 18 hours,
Right.
like, where's the wrinkles?
Yeah.
He didn't look worse for the wear at all. And I started asking him questions. I was just starting to think, is this guy an ET? I've heard about people like ET beings that live and work here on Earth. And I'm thinking, is it possible that this guy's an ET? I started asking him questions about Australia. He didn't fully know the answers. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, I'm a guest to Australia, or a visitor, and I know the answer and you don't. And as we talked more, his voice, I wouldn't call it monotone, but it was almost like somebody on the autism spectrum, but stronger. Like, not in the middle, but stronger. Like, he didn't have the normal inflections that we have. Like, it sounded a little odd to me. Like, anytime you're talking, there's a little bit of emotion in your voice and up and down and depth to it. He didn't have that, only a little bit. And as we were talking, I got thinking, this, and because he didn't know the answers to things, it was like, during World War II, where maybe, you had German spies being sent over to the United States. They can speak with an American accent and they're taught on all the cultural stuff around the United States. And if you were, sitting at a bar talking to this fella, he would be okay for about 5 minutes. But then as you start probing, things would not start to add up. Maybe he wouldn't be right into tune with current events or more subtle things about the country. And that's what I felt with this guy.
Hmm.
And then Lauren was a little bit nervous, and I think he was picking up on that. And now I've also always heard that if you ever have a visitation with an ET, they do not want to scare you. And if they sense fear, they'll leave. Okay, it's the same when they open up a portal, a Zendra, like in South America. If the people are nervous or scared, they'll just pull up stakes and leave. They don't want to scare you. But all of a sudden, he said, well, if you'd rather I leave and go somewhere else, I could do that. And Lauren blurted out before I could even say, why don't you stay with us? She said, well, that would be fine. That would be great. And he left. Now, there's a couple things here. First of all, I said to Lauren after, I said, I think this guy's an ET. And she said, well, why would you say that? And I said, Lauren, just think of it. Nothing adds up about anything that's just happened here. How could he find us? How could he know? I mean, I don't know how many thousand miles the outback is across Australia, but it's all the same. This spot was hidden. And he came right to us. So that was number one. And just, his clothes, where he was going, where he was going to be heading back, all of these things, nothing made sense. And she says, you're right. And she said, we sent away an ET. And I'm thinking to myself, no, you sent him away Not me. But there's another thing that happens here too. Mark, were you going to say?
I gotta fit one little piece in here, Rob. Just one thing. The next day, the piece that Rob's got is very important to. But as context, we found out that he was from Mount Isa. Okay.
Okay.
And there's a part, I'm actually reading my notes here about this because it's interesting we're talking about it because I was doing a little bit of research on this. And he'd mentioned he'd come from the Mount Isa mines. Like these are the mines. And the next day we did a little bit of research, and it's actually online that in the Mount Isa region of Australia, there were multiple articles, including one in the Northwest Star, which is a very prolific Australian paper, where there had been a UFO sighting above the mines a week before all of this happened. So that was really interesting, that there hadn't been any sightings, but this gentleman, this being mentioned that he was from Liza, that he was from these mines.
Out of all places that he could have said, he mentioned this. Gotcha. I'm following you.
Specifically mentioned that he was from Mount Isa, and then we brought up multiple articles about Mount Isa and witnesses claiming about this red orb-like craft that had come over the mines. Well, I mean, you can take it to the fantastical and say, did he come in a week before and landed in Mount Isa and then made his way through? And then the final thing that was kind of funny was while we were looking up about Mount Isa, and I can share this for you.
Yeah, if you want to.
If you want to put it in, but I took a video screenshot of Lauren looking up Mount Isa. And when she brought it up on her phone, and I have it as a screen grab, it has the heading for Mount Isa was Mount Isa Australian, not Australia. It had the
Australian.
Alien. I have the picture right here on my computer.
Okay, yeah, definitely. You'll send me that, and in this conversation, I'll throw it up on the screen as well. It was
very cool, man. Because what ended up happening was Rob and Lauren the next morning. I'm filming them talking live, real time, talking about this experience. And Lauren, in a funny kind of way, I'm recording her. She's like, "Well, let me bring up Mount Isa," and then she goes, "Well, why does it have Australian spelled with the alien on the end of the word?" So it's very just a whole bunch of little things that happened. And go ahead, Rob.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask you, Mark, regarding that article. So that was published by, who was the publisher from that? Do you have that there?
Yeah, I do, and I'll send that link. It was from the Northwest Star, and
right.
It happened. This Mount Isa encounter, where this gentleman said he came from, happened a week before we got to Australia.
Okay, but why do you think they went ahead and wrote Australian? Now, when it's alien, meaning like they wrote it as alien, right?
Alien, and this was Cesar. This is just her Googling Mount Isa.
Yeah,
like I want to look up Mount Isa. Well, it had and at the top of the Google search, it had Mount Isa Australian. ALIEN.
Interesting.
And I took a video of it, and I have this shot. I'll send it to you.
Yeah, we'll definitely take a look at it. Rob, I wanted to ask you, well, first of all, were you finished with that story? Because if not, if not, please finish it. But if so, let's talk about it.
Yeah, so let me finish the story.
Please.
So there's another phenomenon that people have described when they have contact with an ET being. And it's where you're sort of dumbed down. In other words, and I've heard other people, like I've got a friend here who was out with his wife at friends, and then they returned home, out in the country. I'll come back to the other story in a minute, but there's context here. And as they were pulling in their driveway at their farmhouse, they live out in the country, there was a sphere sitting on the chimney. Now, normally, this guy, he's quite technical and so on. He would have spent the time and investigated. He would have gone up there. And, as they drove in the driveway, I think the wife said, "Look, honey, there's this thing on the chimney." And he just says, "I'll go look at that tomorrow." Now, the next day, it was gone, and he's scratching his head And he said to me, he said, in my normal mind, I would never have said, I'll look at it tomorrow. He
Right.
said he would have taken a ladder and gone up and checked it out right in the moment. Okay, so there's something that happens to your mind, and it happened to Lauren and I, because in my right mind, I would never have sent him away in a million years, Caesar. I would have found a reason, despite him saying I
Yeah.
could leave. I would have said, "No, you're welcome to Skywatch with us." Like, that's normally what we do in cases like this. So I wasn't in my right mind, but I didn't exactly feel it. Everything seemed normal sort of at the time. I was just starting to suspect he was an ET, and then he got away. I mean, I would never have let him go in my right mind. There's
Yeah.
more to
And
the
yeah.
story.
And
There's more to
that's
the
and
story.
and it sounds like, Rob, that because you mentioned earlier in the story that you felt like he was reading your mind. So he was there long enough to just, converse with you up to a certain point. But when he started sensing that you're kind of, shaking out of this trance or whatever the case is, he's like, it's time for me to go. So let me ask you this, though. Do you think this being, let's just go with the story. Let's say he did come to this mountain. He went to the mines, probably wasn't by himself. Maybe he was, who knows? But he decided to, somehow they knew that you guys were there, right? Some particular way that we will never really understand. And he came to just, he was curious, just like, like seeing the wild animals in their natural habitat. He's like, oh, look, couple of humans. Let's, I'm here doing work in the mine, alien stuff. Let me just go over there and put on my best suit, or let me try to mimic and make them feel comfortable, just to have a conversation. And when he was done, he was like, all right, well, I'm gonna leave. Do you think that, what do you think the intention afterwards, even days after you were just processing, what do you think the intention of this being was coming to talk to you? Let's go with that.
Gosh, it could very well be something like that, Caesar, where he's just, I don't know why he drove 18 hours just to find us, but maybe he got the word that we're out there sky watching, and he would be safe. There's nobody else around, and he could engage. And then maybe when he realized that we were onto him, or I was starting to be onto him, as you say, that's when he wanted to check out and leave. But there's more to the story, Caesar, because,
Please.
we were kind of regretting that we sent him away. Like I say, I would have never done it in my right mind. But nothing more happened for the rest of the night. We had the equipment set up all night and everything, and it was starting to get light. And we packed away the equipment and we drove back to our resort, which is 30 minutes away. And then I was waiting to turn into the resort and waiting for a vehicle to go by. And as the vehicle went by, Lauren said, "Rob, did you see who was in that vehicle, in that car?" And I said, "No." She said, "It's our guy from last night." And I couldn't believe it. So while I was turning, I just did a 180 and I was going to go follow this person. And the crazy thing was, once I did the 180 and I'm looking for his vehicle, there is no vehicle. So I look and there's no car. And I'm thinking, what the heck? Like, is Lauren lying to me? And she said, "Rob, a car went by and it was our man from last night." And so I said, well, I'm going to keep going. So we drove all the way back to where we were, 30 minutes up the road. Only at the speed we were going, it only took 15 minutes to get there. We looked around where we were, nothing. So that was the second confirmation, Caesar. The first confirmation was all the stuff that happened. Okay. The second confirmation was the fact that he literally was, I was waiting for him to go by and he went by, but when we turned the car, there was no car and there was nowhere else to go. There was only this road going down to the hotel. So that was the second confirmation. The third confirmation was a few months later, I was in this Facebook group. It was to do with Mindsight, my other interest. And this fellow had contacted me from, I believe it was Serbia, and wanted to have a three-way Zoom call with Wendy, who I was practicing with at the time with the Mindsight. So this guy, I didn't know him from Adam. He didn't know Wendy, and we got on a Zoom call. He just wanted to know more about Mindsight because he was teaching it in Serbia himself. So he wanted to kind of touch base with us. But we got into the conversation about a minute, and he said, "Rob, I'm getting a psychic flash." And I said, "Well, what do you mean a psychic flash?" And he says, "Well, I'm very sensitive to these things. I read tarot cards. And do you mind if I tell you what I'm seeing?" And I said, "No, not at all." Now, we had not published any of this information yet about our Australia trip, and not the least of which, about the ET being. Nobody knew about this. Okay. He said, "I'm getting a psychic flash." He says, "I see you and two other people in Australia, in the middle of Australia." And he said, "And one of them's an ET."
Wait, one of the three?
Yeah. In other
Okay.
words,
Yeah.
Lauren and our friend, who we had the encounter with, he said, "I see three of you." And he says, "One is a woman and one is an ET." And he said, "Could that be true?" And I says, "Yeah, it might be."
Might be.
And I didn't want to get into too much because we were talking about the Mindsight stuff, right?
Right, right, right.
So that was crazy because I didn't know him from Adam, and he just blurts it out of nowhere. He doesn't even know that we do all this UFO stuff. As far as he was concerned, I just did the Mindsight stuff. So, those three things, all the stuff that happened, where we were at Uluru, at the mountain there, at this monolith. And then the very next day, on our way back to the hotel, the car going in the opposite direction as if he was going back to the mine. And, he should have been long down the road going to his home, right? And then this third thing that happened where this guy out of nowhere says he's getting a psychic flash. And, I'm in Australia with two other people. One's a woman and one's an ET. And it's like, that was just
Yeah.
too much.
It was too,
much.
yeah, too much of a coincidence. And Mark, I'm going to ask you a question here, but before I do that, I want to touch base on something that you mentioned earlier in your story, Rob. You mentioned that when the being was speaking, he has somewhat of an autistic type of rhythm and flow. And that triggered a thought for me because, recently I've been interested in people that are on the spectrum, why they act this way and things like that. And what in the community that I've been speaking with and having conversation, there's a term that they're assuming that a lot of these people on the spectrum are considered the new humans. Okay, the new humans. So what this means in their mindsight is in their mindsight, go figure. Well, in their vision of what that term means is beings that their frequency are being brought into bodies that their frequency is so high that the frequency and the physical body don't click. And this is why they are so intelligent, still connected, but they can't move these bodies. They can't function the way we see as, what's a normal, functioning human. And in the last 10 years alone, you can Google this or find out, but in the last 10 years, the spike on autistic people has been dramatic, like hundreds of thousands. Okay. From where it was like maybe like, a couple of thousand here and everything. So it's something that's very interesting. Why the spike, So I want to ask, actually, let me take this over to Mark. Based off what I just mentioned about the possibility of these new humans and this increased spike, have you been working in relation to anything on this topic regarding autism spectrum? Have you heard the term new humans, anything like that?
No, it's brand new for me, Cesar, but I will say, with our different people that we've worked with over the years, when it comes to frequency and vibrations and having an understanding of maybe a deeper understanding of consciousness and different things like that, because that's how we got started. We got started with what they call or what's referred to as CE5, which is Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, which is a unilateral basis of communication. You're actually raising your vibrations. Now, to connect that with autism or to connect that with the spectrum, as little as I know, because I don't know a lot, you could see how maybe there is a correlation there. There could be. Maybe it'll be studied more, but there is that understanding that if the brain waves are working in a different pattern or in a different state, that might trigger, that might open up your ability to make contact or maybe have an elevated telepathic kind of connection with extraterrestrials. But that's probably about as much as I know. That's about it for me.
Yeah. No, that's fair. And Mark, I want to ask you this follow-up question. When it comes to making contact, do you think it's more of someone needs to shift their mindset to have the experience, or could it just be a coincidence of being in the right place at the right time?
I think it's a great question, and I think it's a combination. Rob and I have been in a position because of Rob's resources and because of his commitment to it. We've been able to dedicate 10,000 hours to doing this. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not even being modest when I say 10,000 hours because, so when you're dedicating that level of time, and you're going to the spots in the world that have that integration of experience and the indigenous component, and there's so many different factors, right? You will connect those people who have had the one-off, they've had that one experience and it's profound and it's incredible but has it changed their life? Rob and I call it the cosmic carrot. Has it created something in their lifetime that they're always chasing, right? Like a
Like that,
carrot,
yeah.
right? And it did for us because we have a list of like 50 experiences. We could sit and talk for hours about all the different levels of experience and encounter and things that just make us go, how's that possible? Like, it's not possible. But we can do that because we put 10,000 hours to it. So to kind of answer your question in a little bit of a roundabout way, I think there is still an understanding that if you commit time to it, like if you have that time, it's like an exercise. It's like if you keep going to the gym, you're gonna fine tune those muscles. Well, for Rob and I, we've fine tuned our mental capacity to be able to recognize the signs. We see the signs. Now we know them. If we walk into a room, and it's funny, we walk into a room and there's not a coin sitting on the bed, and we see it because our eyes are looking around. And then while we're talking, we look back down and a coin has appeared on the bed. Well, that's a sign. We know because we're very aware of it. We're very in tuned to these messages and we're very in tune to things not being right. Rob will tell you a great story about Antonio's cell phone. It's a mind blow because you can forget about it. You can literally say, whatever, I got to go make dinner. I got to go and do 10 other things. Or you can say, I'm being told something here. There's something that's being communicated to me. I have to recognize it. And that's in the personality. So I think that there's some people that just have an experience, and there's some people who have an experience and then dedicate their time to try to understand it.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Mark. I keep going back to what Rob said about the orb on the chimney and the guy just kind of like nonchalant. Oh, I'll get to it when I get to it. Like, it makes sense because, it's probably it happens probably all the time. Where you see something that without the blur, you'll be like, what the fuck is that? And by the way, we could curse here if you want to express yourself. All right. I don't believe in the whole, watch my words here, but you're like, what the fuck is that? And then, but with these beings that have the ability to kind of like suppress that reaction, I can only imagine, I just, when you said that, it just clicked on me. I'm like, wow, that's probably happening a lot more often than none.
Yeah, so I would just follow up with Mark too and say, when you spend the time out in the field with the intention to make contact or to experience, you will, and we've spent thousands and thousands of hours with experiencers out in the field, and with the equipment. And we've had so many cool, high, strange experiences happen. I
Yeah.
mean, we had auditory things where three of us, we were at the bottom of a volcano crater where there's a village there. It's all arable fields and stuff, but the very center, it's raised. And we went there sky watching with, we had a rented van. And of the three of us, the other member of our crew that night, we both heard the sound of the door being opened or closed, like the sliding sound, because it was a van and nobody was by the van. And we both go over there and I said, "Did you hear that?" And she said, "Yeah, it sounds like somebody just opened the door." And I heard it, she heard it, but in physical reality, the door wasn't being opened or closed. I mean, you can have almost anything happen. We've been at Mount Shasta, where we're going back in August. We're going to be combining the Mindsight with the skywatching expedition. Going to be teaching Mindsight during the day, and then we will apply that ability at night. Because when you use
Okay.
your Mindsight, seeing blindfolded, seeing without eyes, and you can see in real time, you can see beyond the visible range. So
Exactly.
we're going to be using that in the evening and we're going to combine the two. But, there's almost anything can happen. Like when we were at Mount Shasta before, we were doing a meditation outside in the property. It's like a farm and we had a great view of the mountain, but we were doing a meditation. Everybody was quiet and we had the equipment set up. It's recording. There's full spectrum, there's thermal, there's infrared, there's visible, there's time lapse, zoom, there's wide angle, all these cameras. And we were at a point in meditation where it was dead quiet for a few minutes. And I heard a man's voice. And the first thought was, "Oh man, we're supposed to be quiet. And these guys have gone off from the group and they're talking." And it kind of annoyed me that they broke what we were doing. We all agreed we were going to be quiet and meditate. And these guys are talking from our group. So I opened my eyes and I looked around and there was nobody outside the group. Okay. So right away, I took my phone and I did a screenshot to get the time. And then, I just continued on with the meditation. I didn't say a word to our group. But I heard a man's voice. And so when we went back to the farmhouse, I, looked at my phone to get the exact time that this sound was, this voice. And I went to all the videos to that time. And there it was recorded on every single video. And I played it without saying what I thought it said. Without saying, I played it to one of our other members, Dan Burke. And I said, "Dan, what is this man saying?" And he said, "It sounds like he's saying the name Avika." And I said, "Precisely, exactly." And I said, "Do you know who Avika is?" He said, "No." I said, "Avika and Antrell are the male and female ET beings that hang around this mountain. It's very famous for that, and many people have had encounters with those two." So he recognized that that's what it was said. So it was a male voice saying Avika, and that was just outside our meditation. So just another one of literally hundreds of examples of things that can happen that are totally out of the ordinary. I mean, Marcus was saying about my partner's iPhone. And typically when we go on these expeditions, we will have cool, high strangeness things happen. And if they don't happen on the expedition, they happen to people that are in our circle left home where we live, our people that are close to us. So it's one or the other, and we can get into that so-called hitchhiker effect later that they talk about, Skinwalker Ranch and so on.
Yeah.
But we were on this expedition and not much was happening. The very last night, and I'll just rewind a bit. My partner and I had bought each other iPhones for Christmas, the previous Christmas, just a few months before. And it was only a week or two after that that we were all in the kitchen at my place here. His mom, his sister, we had other friends over. We were all there, and Antonio grabbed his phone off the counter in the kitchen, and as he went to pick it up, it slipped out of his hand, went crashing to the floor, cracked the screen, like the glass screen. There was no screensaver on there, no screen protector. Okay.
Mhm.
I had already put mine on. He hadn't put one on his phone yet. Anyway, fast forward to Colombia. It had put a crack across the screen, by the way, and I had grabbed it out of his hand and I said, let me protect that. So I went and got some clear packing tape and I put across the screen, trimmed it and put the case back on, gave it to him. So in the time before we went to Colombia, that tape got old, it peeled a little bit. So I changed it like 2 or 3 times. Each time I could feel the crack on the phone. And I said to myself, Rob, don't slide your finger across. You're going to slice it. It's like a razor blade. You can feel it across the crack. That's okay, right? And I felt it. So the very last night when we were in Colombia, I get a phone call from him. And he's like, Rob, you know my iPhone? And I said, yeah. And he said, didn't it have a crack in the screen? And I said, yeah, it was cracked across. Everybody saw it when you dropped the phone. He said, well, I took the tape off tonight to change it because it was getting old and peeling, and there's no crack on the screen.
No way.
And I said, are you kidding? Is this a joke? He says, no. He said, I said, did you take your phone in and have it changed? He says, no, I haven't had time. I haven't done that. And, I'm the guy that usually does that. I take care of the iPhones, right?
Yeah.
So there was no crack in the glass. It disappeared. Okay.
How?
Now, I got home and I checked to see that it was the same serial number phone that I had bought him, and it was. But Cesar, we have had many experiences that involve what we call, and other scientists that we've met call timelines.
I was
Okay.
just thinking that. I'm glad you touched that. Yes.
Yeah. And they've said, there's like multiple universes, like multiple timelines. And typically we are in all of them.
Yes.
And many of them are the same. Some are a little bit different, like running ahead or running behind. Some are a lot different. And so, likely what happened here was in the one timeline, yes, he dropped his phone. In another timeline, he didn't. It was a random event. He could have easily have dropped it, as not dropped it. So somehow we crossed over into a different timeline. Okay. Now we can talk about these on other episodes, but we've had experiences with checks that have been written that have stayed in the book while the same check has gone through the banking system. 2 checks. One check was written, but there's
Yeah.
2 timelines involved. We've
Love
had
that.
where we were given vouchers at the airport because the plane was going to be late and it was over lunchtime and they gave us vouchers, but suddenly we've got extra vouchers
Yeah.
that got cashed that we cashed, but then the vouchers were still in our pocket. They weren't surrendered, but they were surrendered. So,
Yeah.
you know, we've had a lot of things happen. And I guess getting back to what we were talking about before, when you spend the time and you're actually chasing this stuff, it will also chase you and
Absolutely.
it will
Well
come to
said.
you. And it does, and it has, and it will.
Yeah, I love all that. Yeah, I've known for a while, and I've had these same conversations that we are multidimensional beings. We are existing in multi dimensions at the same time, and there's another parallel reality just like this, but with one small difference, where you have a red hoodie on. That's it. An entire universe exactly the same with one small difference, which is just the color of your hoodie, because it's a possibility because you could have bought that, things like that. So yeah, so you guys have been experiencing shifting timelines. Yeah, that's basically wherever your mindset's at. Wherever your mindset's at, you're shifting all of your atoms and your consciousness into whatever version of you that's doing that stuff. Which brings a great point that I've always told folks that, when just shift your mindset. When you want to reach or achieve something, just think about it, but feel it, you know, because it's a thought first, then it's a feeling, and then it's an action. So if you think about it and you feel like it's real, there is no other option but to act on it. You know, the universe is going to say, okay, I'm going to put you here because you're creating your reality. This is where he wants to be. So I love that you touch base on that. Mark, I know that so you do all these films, these amazing, documents and things like that. How do you capture the innocence of the film without hyping it up too much to where it's just clickbait? How do you still keep it true to whatever the experience actually is?
Even from the beginning, Caesar, there was like a very conscientious decision, to keep it real, to keep it authentic. We never wanted to sensationalize. We never wanted to, like you're saying, like the clickbait style. We wanted it to be true to us, like what we were experiencing. And we've been tempted in the past. We've had channels come forward with a lot of money and different things and say, well, make it scary. Can you make it scary? And it's like, well, that's not what we're experiencing, so you got to have the dignity. You have to have that self-respect to say, well, no, we're not going to represent our experience that way, because there is that chance that they will see that, and there'll be that understanding that you've sold out, or that you're following the same Hollywood style way of doing it. The best experiences that we've had have come from the fact that we've gone to these places and we're interviewing a woman, cutting carrots in a kitchen while she's giving ice cream to the children, right? And she's in the moment. There's not a lot, there's no lights, there's no big sound, hanging in her face or anything of that. So she's trusting us and she's very comfortable. So she tells that story. I mean, we were recently in the best example for me recently was we were in Brazil, and Brazil is known for the Varginha, the case of the extraterrestrials that came to that little town, and there's multiple interactions all over the town. And the one interaction was a police officer who found one of these extraterrestrials and picked the extraterrestrial up and put it in the back of the police car, and unfortunately got scratched by the extraterrestrial, came in contact with it, and subsequently contracted something that killed him. So we got the chance to interview his sister. So her first response to us arriving at her home was, grab all the files, grab everything, grab all the evidence. They're going to want to see all the evidence. And in the moment, Rob and I were like, let's talk to this woman. Let's talk to the sister. Let's have a talk with the sister. How has it affected her life 30 years later? She shed tears. I mean, we were all kind of emotional that day because she was so in the moment and she was so authentic. And she said 2 or 3 times, why are you asking me about myself? Why are you asking me about me? Because she had never been asked about how that whole experience with her brother and everything, how did it affect her and her family? I've had bits and pieces of that interview translated. And to conclude the story, she was like, the only thing that ever bothered me was that they called my brother a liar. My brother is not a liar. And I thought everybody else wanted to just see evidence and newspaper articles and give us the sound bites, give us the cool stuff. And she just from the heart said, thank you for coming today. Thank you for telling my story. And that's what Rob and I are really proud of.
Yeah, and just to make one little clarification here.
Please.
The reason he had picked up the ET is because he was in the downtown area and he had come screaming. There had been reports of ET creatures, and he had come screaming around a corner. And as he did, this creature, more a creature than an ET person, was in the road and he hit him. So the creature was injured and he had picked up the creature to take to the hospital. Okay.
Do you
And
guys did you guys take did you guys have some kind of photos from that ET? Did the sister provide anything like that or?
That's all on the internet. I mean, that's like
Okay.
you can Google Caesar. You can Google Varhenya. If
Okay.
you type in Varhenya, and you'll see the ET with the shape of the head, the red eyes, the whole thing.
Okay.
But we
Yeah.
interviewed multiple people who have researched this for decades because it happened back, I think, in the late 80s. So this is it's a case. It's a very top 3 cases in the world with the most witnesses and the most interaction because people were seeing the crafts. The ET, I think there were 5 of them in total. There were ETs that were ET creatures. They called them more creatures than ETs because of the way they were shaped, and they were everywhere. Like they were all over this little town.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and as a matter of fact, what's the name of the documentary that Jamie Foxx put together, Mark?
Yeah, Moment of Contact.
Yeah. It's a great documentary to watch. This is
Exceptional.
probably the most prolific event of all around ET stuff that there is. It's, the government in Brazil have tried to keep the wraps on it, Cesar, but it's real. I mean, we've talked to many people that were involved with this when we were there doing interviews with people, and there's no doubt that it was a real event that actually happened. We went to the zoo where some of these creatures escaped too, and I guess some of the animals were killed because they died because they were also scratched
Yeah.
and likely picked up some kind of a bacteria or virus. There's witnesses that were at the zoo, like the zoo employees were holding a party for one of the employees, and several of those people had gone outside the party, maybe for a smoke or something, and came to face with the ET creature that was sort of roaming around the zoo there. I mean, we spent probably a whole week there, Mark, and there was so many different stories of separate people that had interacted with these ET creatures. There's a whole museum set up in the town
For that?
For that.
of Varhinya. It's like, I'm not even sure how to spell it, Mark. Varghina or something.
That's correct, Rob. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'll Google it. And did they collectively kind of give you an idea of what they think the intention of these creatures, why they were there?
Most of the time, Caesar, and I would say this is like a common thread, is they're studying us. I mean, they come to study us. And just like we would go to, if we had the ability to go to another planet and to create a little camp, and maybe again hypotheses, right? I mean,
Yeah.
there's some that just come just to experience, the planet Earth. But I've talked to a few people, Rob, and I've had interviews with different contactees like Ricardo Gonzalez, Six Topaz Wells. They're very prolific in South America. Ricardo's retelling of his 25, almost 30-year relationship with Antarel, 9 feet. He's 9 feet tall. Ivica was about 4 feet tall. And, to have him talk about those experiences that he had in the Chilca Desert, he's only had 7 of them in 30 years. He only had 7 face-to-face or telepathic moments. But he says, he reiterates it in the same way as other people reiterate it. They are concerned about us. They are concerned about the planet. They get involved in what could be cataclysmic events, whether they're nuclear based, whether they're virus based. They're not supposed to get involved, but sometimes they do because they feel sorry for us at some level because we're not in, and we talked to, I know I'm kind of going around a little bit, but we talked to the Canadian Minister of Defense, Paul Hellyer. And before he passed away, he was like 92 or something when we interviewed him. And he started to talk, even not recognizing that the camera was rolling as much as it was. And he even said, I've seen this case files. There's 53 different extraterrestrial races, and some of them look like us, and some of them look nothing like us. And And then he stopped himself and said, oh, maybe I'm talking a little bit too much right now. Because these are the guys that are seeing the paperwork, right? Like they're seeing pictures. They know where the craft are. They know where they've taken extraterrestrials to be examined. And he talks about the treaties that some of the extraterrestrial races had treaties with our planet, which permits them to come and look around and do different things. So it's pretty layered. It's pretty layered.
Yeah. Sounds like there's a lot of extraterrestrial politics going on.
Oh, amen, man. Exactly right.
I think that would be the case because there seems just like there's good and bad people with intentions here as humans. I would believe there has to be extraterrestrials. And if we're talking about just to scratch the surface of 53 races, and who knows, there's probably millions of them, everybody is probably going for the same thing: power, control, manipulation, things like that. So, and you mentioned, Mark, that, some of these entities, some of these aliens probably just wanted to take care of us. Where I've spoken to folks and they believe along the same lines, but regarding taking care of us, according to some folks, that we're like cattle. You protect your sheep and your cow because we feed from those cows and sheep and things like that. So these entities that feed off of our energies and things like that, they're protecting their livestock, which is a really bad way for me to try to live my life to believe that we're livestock. But this is why we have conversations with people, because everybody has their own thought on how it works. Rob, I know that the Hollywood has for years, and even now social media depicts aliens or energies as bad entities, bad things. What are your thoughts on that? Like, do you think they're all one way or the other? Do you believe in any of that BS? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I believe it's possible there are other ET races that are not benevolent. We have not experienced any of that. Everything we've experienced has been positive around this. But I always use the analogy also that you kind of are attracted to the kind of things that align with you. For example, when we lived in Sarnia, Ontario, there was a rough area of town, and my dad always told me, don't go there. He said, if you're out riding on your bike, he said, don't go there. He said, bad things could happen to you, and I don't want that, and so I don't want you to go there. So I never did. So I never experienced any bad things. And I find it's possible the same may be around the ETs. That yes, some people do talk about bad ETs or nefarious ETs or beings. We've never experienced it, but it's possible because we don't want to. We're not interested. We align ourselves up with positive things and positive experiences. So I can only tell you that we have not experienced that, Cesar. We've only experienced positive things around this.
Yeah, and I appreciate that because, it's just, I feel like there's governments or groups of people that try to write the narrative and tell everybody this is how they are. Be afraid of them, while there's others are just like, no, they're kind. But to your point, Rob, it's about who you interact with. It's like, for example, let's say somebody told me that the both of you were just really bad people, right? But then we have a conversation and we get along just fine. So I would rather judge, the interaction versus the narrative or the story from somebody else. Would you guys agree with that?
I would agree with that.
Yeah, and it's true. The government have kind of, they've wanted to keep all this secret for so long. So they've introduced the giggle factor years ago, where if you know, talked about ETs or craft, that, you were made to look like you were stupid or crazy. And so this has been going on, this stereotype, for a long time. Now it's breaking now. You've had a lot of whistleblowers come forward, and, the credible level of people that are now explaining their experiences, people in the armed forces and in the Navy and the Air Force and so on, these different whistleblowers. And so it's now moving out of the range of, the tinfoil hat and the crackpots and all that kind of stuff. People have been experiencing this forever. They continue to experience it. And it doesn't mean you're crazy if you do experience it. It's okay to talk about it. In my case, when I was a kid, experience that I had coming out of scouts and seeing this craft in the sky for probably 15 minutes and the interaction I had with it, it was written about in the paper the next day, and over 200 people had seen it. So I got my experience validated by, policemen had seen it. I think even the mayor himself had seen it. So, and doctors and lawyers, people of very high standing had seen this craft. It was during the famous flap of 1966, the girls' school in Ann Arbor, Michigan, or whatever, and all the things that went on at that time. But because it was written up in the paper the next day, I never worried about talking about it. I never felt embarrassed or worried that people would call me crazy. I mean, I've got the newspaper article. So I would say, well, I don't care if you don't believe me. I know what I experienced it and 200 other people did also. So, you know, that's your problem if you don't believe me. I don't care.
Rob, if people want to Google that story, where can they find that?
I don't think you'll actually find it. It's in the archives in the Sarnia Library, Sarnia, Ontario Library. I'm going to actually look for the article right now on my phone and
Okay.
I'll show it on the
Okay.
screen. Or,
So it's not like
I
it's
can,
not like a internet Google thing. They've kept it on their local papers and things like that, right?
But you could also,
yeah, you can
Caesar,
read about,
you can Google it. You can Google, if you type in 1966 Michigan UFO flap, it'll come up. It'll definitely
Okay.
come up because it was incredibly prolific. I mean, it was so prolific, it brought in Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who came in and did like a full investigation. And of course, Project Blue Book. I mean, this is all early. This is all early Project Blue Book. But there were hundreds of witnesses, like all along the lake, like up and down the lake, all the way Bend and back. Yeah, right there.
Perfect. Appreciate that, Rob. Yeah. And Rob, can you give us some highlights about that interaction? Like, I mean, were you the main star of this this situation? Was it like a one-on-one? Go
at
for
my
it, please.
school I was. At my school I was, but there's the date that it was in the newspaper right there.
Gotcha. Okay.
Tuesday, March
Appreciate
3rd, 1966, March 29th, and the 28th, Monday night, was when I had the interaction. Did you want me to tell the story?
Please. Yeah, by all means, please.
So I was only 12 years old and I was in scouts and I was leaving scouts out the back door of the church. My mom said that she would pick me up and just call her when I was finished. And so I called her and she was on her way. I went outside to wait on Front Street, Sarnia, which is right against the St. Clair River. Right across from the St. Clair River is the United States. It's Michigan. It's Port Huron, Michigan. And both Sarnia, Ontario and Port Huron, Michigan are at the very bottom of Lake Huron. So when I went outside, immediately these kids that were playing in the street said, "Hey, mister, there's a helicopter in the sky." Now, it always struck me as strange why they even told me that. You know, I will say that when I was watching this thing, the kids somehow disappeared and I never did notice them leaving. That could be a whole nother story. But, at the age of 12, they called me a mister because I had my scout stuff on, my tie, shiny black shoes, belt, shorts, hat, all this stuff. So to them, I guess I looked like a mister, but I was watching this light. It was a very bright light and it was probably the same brightness as the ISS or even brighter when that goes over the International Space Station. And it was going slowly from the north to the south, right over me, and like right over the river, right over me. And it was up, I estimated it at about 800 feet approximately. And I was watching it and I said to the kids, "It's not a helicopter." And they said, "Well, what is it?" I said, "I don't know." There was no wings. There were no flashing lights for navigation. There was no blade or the sound of a blade. There was no sound at all, but it wasn't up very high. And as it changed directions, here was the crazy thing: was it was in a split second, in the blink of an eye. In other words, if you blinked your eye, then now it's going in the other direction. So it started out as I looked up, coming from the north, going to the south, and all of a sudden it's going north again. And I thought, how is that even possible? Any kind of a craft like an airplane or even a helicopter, if it's a plane, it has to do like an arc around. Okay. it doesn't come to a stop. It just goes to an arc, and it'll look like it's slowing down, coming to a stop as it now comes around that arc and reverses direction. Even a helicopter would do the same thing, or a helicopter could slow down and come to a stop and then reverse. But this craft was instantaneously changing directions 180 degrees. Like it would just be going along, and the next blink of an eye was going in the other direction, which is impossible. That kind of deceleration and acceleration, the occupants would be crushed to jelly, right? It's not possible. Can't do that. And so I was starting to suspect this might be what we called flying saucers at that time. This is 1966. And now the other thing that happened is each time it changed direction, it came a little bit lower. So finally, it was up at about 500 feet above me, and I could see some detail. And when I looked up and I was squinting my eyes, I saw this bright light, but it appeared that this bright light was a lens, and the light was coming from inside the craft, and I could see figures moving that were sort of in front of this light that was coming from inside the craft that was shining through this lens in the bottom. And when I saw that, the hair goes up on my arms and my heart starts pounding, and I'm thinking, "Oh my God, this is a flying saucer. These are occupants. Am I going to be abducted?" And I was getting kind of scared. And just then my mom showed up, and she says, "Rob, come on. We, got to go home, get your homework done." And I says, "No, get out of the car. You've got to see this. There's a flying saucer in the sky." And she just laughed. And she says, "Oh, come on, Rob. It's probably a plane or a helicopter or some birds or a satellite or something." I said, "No, it's not. Get out of the car." So she got out of the car. We looked up, and it was gone. And I'm thinking, "Oh, yeah, now she's going to think I'm a liar. I'm fabricating the whole story, right?" So
Yeah.
it's pretty quiet in the car. We go home, and I tell my dad and my brother the story, and they just laughed. And so I just kind of went down to my room, and my door went closed a little bit stronger than it would normally close. And I did my homework and went to bed. And the next day I went to school. I didn't say anything to anybody. But when I got home from school, my mom was all excited. And she says, Rob, you got to see what's on the front page of the paper. It's what you saw last night." And I looked at it, and that's what I just showed you in the screen. And I thought, yes, there is a God. And she read the whole article to me. And it's interesting because on the second page, Cesar, they were interviewing the high level people at the Selfridge Air Force Base on the Michigan side. That's like, I don't know, 15 or 20 miles down the river. And in the interview, they said how they had sent off 2 jet fighter craft after this thing, and it left them in the dust.
Wow.
Now, it was a few years ago that I went back to Sarnia with my younger son because he wanted me to get the article. He wanted to see it. So we found the article in the archives, but it was missing page 2. Okay.
Okay.
In the microfilm, they had the whole newspaper microfilmed, but page 2, where they interviewed all these top people, and it was all documented, right? And I didn't think anything of it. And she said, "Oh, it's probably, a mistake. It'll be in one of the other archives in Canada." And there was about 7 other places where they keep all the newspapers archived. So she called every one of them for me, and every single one, page 2 was missing. Okay. So I don't have page 2 today, but my mom told me she read the whole article and it talked about it. So, this is how conspiracy theories start, right?
Yeah.
Did they suppress page 2? Well, probably. Probably because, it gave all the detailed information from the base on what was happening with that UFO, with that so-called flying saucer. But this was just one of many things that was happening at that time period in 1966. And your viewers or listeners can Google search that, as Mark says, and they'll read all about the girls' school, the landing of a craft that all the girls saw, right? And many other things that happened. And I was
Yeah.
part of it. I got to experience it. And then it was 2 weeks later, we saw a whole fleet of craft.
Badass.